Well, welcome to Climate Courage, Propaganda, Misinformation and Lies. My name's Andrew Edwards, and I'm very, very happy to have my friend Andrew Milroy here today. Welcome, Andy.
Hey, great to be here with you, Andrea.
Yeah, this is going to, I have no idea where we're going to go with this, so I'm excited about it. But one of the biggest issues we face, and we face many, many issues, but it is the manipulation and coordinated attacks on our knowledge platforms across the world. It's not just about climate, it's about creating societal divisions and causing chaos. And well, it's working. And that's why I asked Andy to join us today, because he's got some great insights into this. So Andy, do you want to tell everyone a little bit more about, what you do, what your background is, as well as what you're really passionate about?
Sure. So look, I've been in the technology industry analyst business for most of my career, and that's, where we met, of course, Andrea. In the last few years, I've been focusing more exclusively on cybersecurity, and that's an area that I have huge interest in, and it's a broad area as well, cybersecurity. So, it doesn't just look at, pure technical issues. There are policy issues. There are issues around things like, misinformation, actually becomes a security issue, and increasingly these days, a national security issue. So, I do some work in this area, and I do take a lot of interest in it. I think it's a fascinating space, and it's very relevant today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I was trying to work out, I think we've known each other for 25 years. So that's a long time.
Well, that's perhaps even more. Even more. I think it was 95 when we first met, but a long time. Or 96, yeah. But roughly 25 years.
Yes. Seen a lot. All right, we're going to start with information warfare, and this might be a topic that a lot of people have never even considered, right? So there's a journalist in the UK called Carol Cudwella, and I'm presuming I've got her name right, but she's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who writes for The Guardian and The Observer, and she's been a voice on this issue for many, many years, and she definitely is paying the price for speaking truth to power. But a key focus area of her writing, as well as her talks, she's got a very famous TED talk, is the weaponization of social media, which can be linked to Brexit, the election of Donald Trump, and many, many other things. She's also the journalist that outed Cambridge Analytica. So basically, based on what she said in her research, Russia has used information warfare for years, with thousands of trolls and fake accounts flooding all of our social media platforms, and their primary role is to sow division, confusion, fear, and more. And we can all see how successful they're being. The experts who've studied these actions or these actors, they've understood for years what's going on. But regardless of this, it continues to work, and it continues to divide us. To me, there's two angles to this. The first is that we never seem capable of addressing the fact that this is a form of warfare of Russia against the West. And it's obviously not just Russia. But there's the other side of it, is it's been proven, it's been known, yet we can't seem to wake up to the fact that we're being manipulated. So we continue to believe the lies which have been planted to create chaos in the world. So, Andy, information warfare, what are your thoughts?
Look, it's a fact. I can talk about it for a long time. I'll try and keep it concise, kind of response to what you've been saying. But, first, I think it's very important to try to, and it's becoming almost impossible to depoliticize a lot of the topics that we're discussing. But not too long ago, a lot of these issues that you were talking about, issues like the fact that, Russia has been involved, the GRU in particular have been involved in aggressive cyber attacks against United States infrastructure, massive misinformation campaigns. I mean, this was consensus, right? This is not something that people have been debating or arguing about. The Mueller report, which was kind of not the Mueller report, detailed how the GRU, which is the military intelligence in Russia, was directly involved in the Hillary Clinton email leaks, and obviously a lot of the narratives that came around that. So this is not just an investigative journalist digging this up. I mean, this is fact that's been uncovered over and over and over again in various reports. I think what Carol, I always got the name wrong. Cadwell.
We'll just call her Carol.
Yeah, Carol, I think what she did is she dug around in detail and started, connecting the dots, so to speak. But we hear that from a lot of different folks, and started noticing the involvement of the same actors, the same kind of patterns in, creating all kinds of aspects of chaos in Western democracies. And obviously Brexit, if you'd call that chaos, which I guess a lot of people would, and the activities of Trump and some of Trump's acolytes, if you call that chaos, and some people would, have been directly linked to some of these campaigns that we can attribute directly to Russia. But I think what's important to understand is that we've got a bunch of authoritarian regimes, and we will use the word weaponize, who have figured out how to weaponize the internet and social media in particular to get across narratives super fast that suit their agenda. That 10, 20 years ago, these narratives would have been on the periphery. These would have been marginal, slightly wacky points of view. I'm not saying they wouldn't have existed, and I'm not even saying there's no validity in any of them. Some of them have elements of truth behind them, but they're tied around a narrative that suits a political agenda. And what you find with the authoritarian regimes, and obviously the biggest of those are Russia and China, is they're able to come out with a single powerful narrative and suppress any attempts in their orbits to challenge that single powerful narrative. Democracies have got all manner of different narratives floating around, so it's much, much harder for them to generate propaganda based on one particular narrative. What we are seeing is that authoritarians in democracies are latching on to one particular narrative. And we saw, look, I know a lot of people who voted for Brexit, and a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump, who I would not say are authoritarians, are perfectly reasonable and intelligent people. I don't want to discredit everybody who's done that. Yep. But some of the narratives that came out around Brexit were just very, very kind of simple mantras that were repeated over and over and over again, right? All this stuff about Ramonas and people trying to wreck the effort, and there was a few standard mantras that were repeated, and the same with some authoritarian narratives in the United States that come out super fast. Like, I think what's interesting is the latest stuff around Donald Trump. Just overnight, before you know it, everybody who's associating themselves strongly with Donald Trump is coming out with the same whataboutism narratives. What about Hillary Clinton? What about the Biden crime family and so on? The weaponization of the justice system without even reading the indictment in detail, without even looking at whether or not there's any truth of it in it. They've stolen the narrative. And the same thing happened with the Mueller report. They just immediately said, Donald Trump is immediately vindicated, when actually the Mueller report was not designed to figure out if Donald Trump was guilty or not of a particular activity. It was trying to understand whether or not there was Russian government-directed interference in the 2016 presidential election, and it found out that yes, indeed there was, and it prosecuted a whole bunch of people. So the point I'm trying to make is that authoritarian narratives are much easier to get across through social media, just simple authoritarian narratives, and to get people to latch onto them, repeat them, and believe them, because they're often very simple, they're not complicated. And the authoritarian narratives in the US have been incredibly powerful and caught on incredibly fast. And a lot of this, I have to say, is supported and linked to what's coming out of authoritarian regimes in other parts of the world, which is quite worrying, really, when you think about it. And you think, well, is there a direct link? Are they working together in this? I mean, we can't prove that, but sometimes it looks like there are standard authoritarian narratives that are coming out.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
No, absolutely. I suppose it's the motivation for doing it. Like, obviously, destabilizing the West, but if you destabilize the West, you destabilize the world, including your own country, right? I think that's where people sort of struggle. They're like, it doesn't make any sense. Why are they doing it?
Well, not if you want a like-minded government in the United States to your own that is going to basically ultimately say, okay, Russia, Ukraine and Eastern Europe is your backyard, right? And then this is potentially the motive of Russia. So they have basically a friendly regime. Sorry, I shouldn't say regime. That's the wrong word to use. A friendly government in the United States. You could call it a regime, but ultimately that would be the goal. And the same in Europe. So they don't like the European Union. Ideally, they'd like, and it's not just them, it's the other authoritarian regimes in the world. They'd like to break it up, fragment it, and have like lots of arguments and squabbles going on between all the member states rather than one, rather than the giving that entity the power that it has at the moment, the European Union. So there is a motive for sure, which is to be able to ensure that they stay in power and that their form of government is not threatened by democracy, for want of a better way of describing it, because democracy is ultimately the enemy of any authoritarian regime. And I will call what we have in China and Russia authoritarian regimes. That's what they are.
It's I think there has to be a psychological sort of perspective to it. It's just not greed and power. There must be, the narcissism that everyone's sociopathic behaviors everyone's talking about as well that are mixed into it, because everyone suffers with the division, no matter where you are.
Well, I think it's quite well. Look, I think if you're running the Russian government or the Chinese Communist Party, it is in your interest to weaken your perceived enemies. And if you perceive the Western democracies as your perceived enemies, and you don't want to go to have a kinetic war that you probably lose anyway and would go nowhere, misinformation and bending people to thinking the way you do is a great way of doing it. And they are succeeding in many areas. They really are succeeding. They've done if you had to give them marks out of 10, you'd say 10 out of 10, right? For the success that Russia's had in peddling misinformation around the Western world and achieving their objectives, right? Which is to weaken the European Union is one of them. It's been stated, it's no secret. And another one is to have a government that is sympathetic to them in power in the United States. And hey, they don't need to do anything else. They wouldn't need to invade Ukraine if this was in place.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to Twitter. So I know that for a lot of people, are you still on Twitter? Do you still use it?
Yeah, less and less. Look, I'm moving off. I just find social media too toxic these days. It's been taken over by trolls and people pushing these narratives we're just discussing. I find that my social media feed is increasingly stuff like Jordan Peterson and I think, why are they targeting me with this stuff? Right, climate change denialism, all this kind of stuff, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know if I really want to associate myself with this toxic cauldron of nonsense anymore. So I'm backing off, to be honest with you. And I know you could argue that maybe I should stay in and keep the conversation going, but I think just go somewhere else and have the conversation. Just leave it. Yeah, it's like if I go to a place and I don't like the way what's going on, I leave. I don't. If I know that I'm outnumbered, I just go somewhere else. Yeah, maybe exactly. Maybe it's a battle that I should be taking on.
Yeah, I think you've got to be up for the battle. So I've stepped out of the concept of, they call it climate brawl. So basically, so Twitter has turned into the thing that really frustrates me about Twitter is it was one of the most powerful platforms in the world for a very intelligent conversation around climate, with the climate scientists and everybody else who was interested, including people like me, right? And so what Musk has done since he's taken over is he's destroyed this community of communication where we could all learn and share with each other. So that's something that's been, just to watch that destruction in real time and to know the impact that it's going to have, because all the scientists are moving to all these other platforms, Mastodon or whatever. I think everyone should just get over onto LinkedIn and take the conversation there. It's a well-established platform and it's the platform of business. So let's put it there, because if business doesn't get behind the conversation, Oh, don't worry. The conversation on LinkedIn has certainly ramped up in the last few years. But Musk, he's fired his content management teams. He's dismantled the platform sustainability arm. He's lifted bans on several prominent people like Jordan Peterson, as you said, and Donald Trump. Although I think Donald seems to like his own social media network, because
he doesn't. Whatever he says gets broadcast everywhere anyway, right?
True, but he doesn't.
He says it all. He doesn't need Twitter. He doesn't. Whatever he puts in Truth Social gets onto the news.
Yeah, but I think maybe he also enjoys the fact that everyone's nice to him on his own social media platform, whereas on Twitter he has to contend with people who call him an idiot, right? But what's happening because of the destruction of this community of climate activism that really has been building up for a very long time on Twitter is one of those climate scientists, Twila Moon, said, "Folks noticing a rise in climate denialism and disinformation is particularly worrying, and I am concerned that it could slow down climate action in ways that are devastating to economies, communities, and health." And to me, that's the important thing. Slowing action because of misinformation is basically just means that people around the world are going to suffer and die. You know, Musk's mother is famous for saying that she set up all of her children with the mantra, "Make sure you do good in the world." And it seems like he's the one that's sort of heading us off the cliff. In the EU recently, they've threatened to ban Twitter across the entire EU, which would be amazing because of the rise of hate speech. But, you know, when I look at the governments and the businesses, especially the social media companies, they all just seem so impotent here. What do you think?
Well, look, I think the social media companies are not driven by whether or not there's hate speech on their platforms or whether or not there's dangerous content on their platforms. They're driven by profit and loss, by valuation, you know, the same things as all big companies are driven by. So even in the past, you know, I found Facebook, there was plenty of toxic material to be found on Twitter and Facebook and other social media platforms. Look, I think basically what happens, I mean, I find the climate one's interesting because if you go back, you know, not too far back, maybe 10 years ago, you know, maybe the early 2010s, there was a consensus that what the majority of climate scientists were saying was correct and that we needed to act. And this consensus was across the mainstream politicians. So in the US, it was Republicans and Democrats. You know, Vladimir Putin was making noises that, you know, he was acknowledging that something needed to be done. Similarly, China was taking it on board, and some people thought China might take a lead on some of these issues. But for some reason that I can't fully understand, I can just come up with theories as to why I think that might be. The standard misinformation trolls, and a lot of them are coming from the same places, we know that, by the way, are starting to you know, discredit any climate science that comes out and any climate scientist. It's a bit like, I remember in the Brexit, you know, 99% of economists, the vast majority of economists said it was, you know, something you shouldn't do, but they were progressively discredited. And the one economist that thought it was a good idea, his voice would be amplified. And something similar is happening with climate science, that the one or two scientists who question it are being amplified, and the vast majority who are in agreement are being discredited. And people who know nothing about it, like, and I will use this guy's name, Jordan Peterson, he's a psychologist, not a climate scientist. This guy's perspectives, I mean, people treat him like he's almost like a Donald Trump figure. Whatever he's saying must be true. So he pops up and he starts discrediting climate science as well, with lots of debunked theories that we debunked 10, 20 years ago. It's just remarkable. So I can't fully understand the motives behind this stuff, because it does seem to be coming. It's these same people. It's these authoritarians that are coming out with it. And maybe it's to create chaos, because authoritarians thrive when there's chaos and conflict going on around them. They can point a finger, blame people, and get into power, saying we are the ones that will save you. You know, that's the formula they've used for a long, long time. So maybe it's something along those lines. Maybe, and you know, I maybe because the Russian economy is dependent on fossil fuels, maybe there's an incentive for those guys to create a bit of doubt. But having said that, they have their own problems in Russia that they need to address, like the Siberian fires, for example. And, you know, Putin is on record as saying that it's something that, you know, they want to deal with, and they signed up to the Paris Climate Accord and so on. So it's really difficult to fully understand. I think it must be all about, again, going against the so-called experts, undermining, because in a democracy, you have lots of different voices, and people tend to give credit to experts. In a democracy, in an authoritarian state, the experts say what the head honcho wants them to say. So it's something like that, silencing people who aren't following a narrative. But it's hard to get in a Western democracy why these people would be getting such a beating and why climate denialism will be taking off. And I get it in my day-to-day conversations. It's just jaw-dropping. There are people I know who repeat the Jordan Peterson rubbish and think he's a wonderful guy that I'm having a beer with, and who I know are intelligent people, and I'm just astounded by it. And then as soon as I argue the case, I'm branded as some kind of communist or something.
Yeah.
As soon as I go, but guys, what I'm saying is something that everybody agreed on, right and left, 10 years ago. Nothing new has come up to discredit that. In fact, the only information we've had since then reinforces and strengthens the arguments and the science that was put forward 10 years ago or more. I mean, I first read about this stuff when I was a kid, and my parents gave me a Life on Earth book in 1979. So we've known about it since then. It's not new. It was the scientists were aware of it at that time.
Yeah.
There were a few people saying, "Oh, but we're in we were told we were going into an ice age." So there's a bit of people taking the mickey out of those theories then, but it's just gained momentum ever since the late 70s, and there's been just more and more evidence to reinforce those, not arguments, those facts.
Yeah, and
so, I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
It's before our eyes. I know.
And it ties into what the authoritarians are doing elsewhere. And I'm labeling authoritarians, these people who push out a simple, aggressive narrative that attacks everybody else and suggests that they're the only ones with the true vision of what's going on, and anyone who puts themselves forward as an expert is some kind of enemy of the state, basically.
Yeah. And there's obviously a lot of money in the fossil fuel industry going into a lot of this. One of the tips at the end I've got is, whoever you listen to, understand how they earn their money. And
sure,
if you don't know where they're getting paid, then that's a problem. We should know who's paying who. So if people are speaking up against the narrative of the climate scientists, just understand how they're being paid. And you might not change your mind, but that's fine. But I think that's a pretty obvious place, that anyone who's sort of spreading the outrage.
Democracies is they've enabled academics to be independent in the research that they do, right? Is one of the things they've done. And secondly, Western democracies, based on facts that come from academics and others, have been able to adapt to changes that have taken place. I mean, when the science came out about cigarettes, slowly and gradually, most people, most societies reduce smoking radically, for example, and nobody really disputes the fact that cigarettes are, people did 30, 40 years ago. They dispute whether or not cigarettes were bad for you. Some, doctors used to say, oh, they can help your cough, in the 1950s and so on. But the tobacco industry just evolved. They're still around, these big companies. Not always ethical in what they've done, but they've evolved. They've got into other adjacent markets, not just tobacco. Now, you could say that the same. There's a huge opportunity in electrification, and a lot of economies are making that transformation. And a lot of the naysayers who listen to the authoritarian narrative when you talk about electrification, go, oh, but what about all the damage lithium mining causes? What about all the pollution? That again, the whataboutism. You go, well, yeah, sure. But overall, in the long term, it's less than remaining dependent on fossil fuels. It's a bit like moving away from steam engines. But the point is, the big oil and gas companies, there are some of them anyway, not all of them, but some of them can adapt and get into new types of markets. So they've got enough capital to do that. And some of them are slowly doing it. They have every opportunity to move. They need to be the new era. Look at the automotive manufacturers moving into electric vehicles, for example. You don't get propaganda from BMW or Ford, or maybe you do, but it's not very apparent.
They all came together, all of them together, when the fossil fuel scientists released their research, in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s.
Oh yeah, but not now.
Yeah, but they brought all of those industries together. But there's the automotive industry. They've still got their SUV car ads. They're not changing fast enough, right? But
not fast enough, but they do recognise that the future is electric vehicles. So you talk to anyone in the automotive sector, they'll say, "Well, the future is in electric vehicles." You're right. You could argue that they should be doing it a lot faster, but But
if we
again,
just
they're going where the money is, and they.
But if we replace
electric vehicles,
if we replace fossil fuel vehicles with electric vehicles at the same number, then we're not going to make it. So we need a whole revolution in transportation, and they're not getting behind that conversation, right? Because they want to keep making money. So everyone, you look at the rising numbers of EVs being bought. I don't think it's a great thing, because yes, we do need to move people into EVs, but we actually need to revolutionize how we, the concept of personal transportation. Yeah.
Well, look. Yeah. Sorry, Andrea. I interrupted.
No, I was just going to say, we've talked about authoritarianism. So George Monbiot published a piece this week, and it's titled "The Hard Right and Climate Catastrophe Are Intimately Linked. This is How." And I really recommend that you read it. I'll put it in my weekend reads.
I did. You gave me the link. I read it.
Yeah, cool. But for our listeners, many are talking about the rise of the far right, especially across Europe. And honestly, if this is the path we take, we've really got no chance of overcoming the very real threats we face. So from George, he said, as governments turn rightwards, they shut down policies designed to limit climate breakdown. There's no mystery about why. Hard right and far right policies are the defensive wall erected by oligarchs to protect their economic interests. So basically the resurgence. So there's another writer called Umair, I can't remember his surname is, but he writes great stuff. And he's been talking about this for a long time too. I often include his stuff in the reads. But the rise of the far right is a threat to all of us. How do we address this? What can we do? How do we make people aware that there's no big strong man coming to save us?
Look, I think we have to be very careful. I mean, George Monbiot, I do read a lot of his stuff, but again, we have to be careful because he's very strongly associated with the left in politics, right? Mm-hmm. So if you quote George Monbiot and so on too much, then people might tune out. I mean, I do my best to read what right-wing thinkers say as well, and exactly. There's plenty of reasonable, logical right-wing thought. I mean, there's the hard right, of course, and there's the hard left, but there's plenty of reasonable economic, social arguments. Carbon trading and all this kind of stuff.
We're looking at the far. Yeah, we're looking at extremes, and as you said, it's left and right. It's not just one way.
So someone like Monbiot, that what I would say about him is that that particular article, is you've got two types of capitalism. You've got what you might call the rogue capitalism, and I would throw rogue capitalism is kind of disrupted, unregulated capitalism. And I don't want to throw too many industries under a bus, but often property development's a bit less regulated. Hedge funds, people say, should be regulated a lot more than they currently are. There's oil and gas in lots of parts of the world is pretty wild, right? I mean, it's more regulated in countries like Australia, but still a lot of people would say it should be a lot more regulated. So you get what you would call the slightly rogue capitalism that tends to focus on smaller areas, let's say, and nation states to a greater extent. And then you get the big corporate global capitalist organizations that depend on rules agreed by countries, that depend on the rules-based order, basically. And they tend to be they tend to go with, I mean, I'm not saying they're great, ethical organizations by any stretch of the imagination, but they're not going for this disruption. They're happy with the rules-based order as it's been, since the end of World War II, basically. But what you've got is the emergence of what you might call this rogue version of capitalism that wants zero regulation, wants kind of big man approach. Yes, Russian oligarch style. We're the rich and powerful. We get what we want just through our sheer wealth and clout and influence and connections, and we will steamroller anyone in our way. And it's this form of capitalism that seems to be on the ascendancy. And they've been,
this is not just an overnight change. They've been building this.
And these guys tend to be more aligned with the far right of politics. I mean, the guys who sponsor, some of the people in the MAGA movement in the United States. But having said that, a lot of the richest people in the world, like Microsoft company you work with, Bill Gates, is not that way inclined at all. Jeff Bezos, as far as we know, is not that way inclined at all. Jack Ma certainly didn't seem to be. They seem Warren Buffett. these all seem to be people who are switched on to a lot of this climate science issues and seek to do what they can to operate in what they perceive to be an ethical manner, right? I mean, I'm not here to defend them or say they're wonderful people, but they're not what George Monbiot is referring to, despite the fact that these are some of the richest people on earth. And we mentioned Elon Musk a bit earlier. It's never quite clear what his agenda is. He seems to be a bit of just a maverick. So I find it very difficult to understand where he's coming from and where he's heading to. But a lot of the richest people in the world are not how Monbiot is talking about these oligarchs and the destruction of the climate change narrative. It's a certain group that's doing it. It's not all rich capitalists that are doing it.
Yeah. It's interesting. You were talking about the fossil fuel industry. So I've had Dr. David Coe and Richard Bussolato on here who talk about the Unsustainable Truth is their book. And one of the things that they're seeing happening is the oil companies, that when they sell off an asset, so if they're one of the global oil companies, they're operating under these rules. And what they're doing is they're selling off these assets, and then those assets go into the hands of the rogue operators, which, so a fossil fuel field in Nigeria, right? And from when they had it, there was less pollution, less environmental contamination. And now there's no sort of look at it. So I mean, I think no one's sort of understanding what they're doing, or what they're seeing the destruction in the environment. So, this ability to get rid of these assets before they become static assets, it's a real threat to the environment.
To cut to the chase, what these people often don't like, and what the so-called far right doesn't like, and a lot of these authoritarians don't like, is they don't like experts, who are doing research in a certain area and coming up with evidence, and then presenting that evidence to government that then regulates. So they don't want these experts to come up with evidence that creates a regulation. So they found a formula for generating wealth, and they don't want some, as they would label it, do-gooder coming along, some Greta Thunberg coming along and changing the way they do it, right? So, but having said it, that's an awful way to characterize it. It's not Greta Thunberg, but she popularizes a lot of the climate science ideas. But they certainly don't want these so-called experts, whether it be in climate or medicine. It was the same around COVID, to come along and change the way things are done. Yeah. And so they push back, and they have their allies. That it seems to be right-wing authoritarians across the globe who seem to be united in their approach, and that's what is disturbing. Yeah, because it's global. It is
absolutely.
And it gives them so much power. It's not, and this is why, I think I mentioned to you how we started a conversation that led to this discussion was when we met in Phuket recently. One of the topics of conversation I've been having is that I think the internet is now net negative. I think there were years of, we could say that internet technology was creating new opportunities and doing great things and sharing knowledge and information to people in isolated communities and so on, helping remote healthcare, all these things we used to talk about. Now, sure, it's doing some of that, but on the other hand, the internet has caused enormous damage, and along the lines of what we're discussing, these points of view are now been acted on with policies, right, that are linked to these points of views we're discussing, right? So these trolls who are attacking climate change are now leading to the emergence of politicians like Ron DeSantis in the United States, who's getting rid of all controls around climate change, right? So he's one of the people who argues that a lot of this stuff is bogus, and it's basically left-wing people pushing a left-wing agenda that needs to be trodden on.
Yeah. Oh, so But the net negative.
So that these viewpoints would once have been marginal. They would once have been right out there on the edge. And because we've got this globalization, this ability to use the internet to amplify these perspectives and make them go mainstream is what is really scary. And this climate science is one of them. And you could argue, I mean, I know plenty of people who identify as Republicans in the US who are very smart, switched on people who vote Trump. They might agree with some of the stuff that I'm saying here, but some of the chaos that led to Trump being elected and keeps Trump in the news, it's the same people are behind that.
Yeah. When you talked about net zero, so I have this very passionate belief that social media was the democratization of information. So for the first time in human history, it wasn't just the big oligarchs owning the media, the Rupert Murdochs of the world, who's another part of the problem, by the way, that we don't really talk about. But but the other side is so many good people are stepping away, like you said right at the beginning, because it's just become a cesspool and you don't want to be part of it. And I totally understand. But one of the things that I'm seeing is there's groups of experts in specific fields. Like I think I've spoken about it on Climate Courage before, hydrogen. So there was years where all I ever heard about was hydrogen is the solution, right? And I'm like, if just from a common sense perspective, I'm like, if hydrogen was always the solution, why are we only hearing about it now? And because it was just so repetitive, and then everyone I spoke to agreed with it, I started looking beyond the mainstream and looking for people who didn't agree with it. And I found this group of people who are experts, and they're chemical engineers and scientists and lots of different things. And they started speaking up about hydrogen being a bad idea because it's a waste of time and we need to focus on things that matter. And so, and they came together as a group, and they've been out there, and they're tired. They get despondent, because it's very difficult, because the hydrogen message was funded by the fossil fuel industry, and therefore they got so much money to put behind it, right? And there's this small group of independent people who went out without the money behind them, and they broke through, or they got my attention anyway. And they're doing really well, and I can see that the attention is growing, but we need those groups of experts who are going out there speaking up, no matter how ugly it gets, because it's the global conversation. I
don't want to sound too cynical, but they're just drowned out, Andrea. I mean, it's just
no, I don't think that this example, they're definitely not being drowned out. They're definitely not, but they're fighting for it. They're not giving up. They're fighting really, really hard, because if we waste our time going down any technological route that is not a solution, then we're not going to help ourselves. So they're passionate, they're fighting, they're getting attention, they're getting the platforms that they should be on, not the media, obviously, but but we've got to be in the fight. We can't step away no matter how ugly it gets. And that's, something.
Well, look, there are ways you can do it. You can publish, when you get up in front of an audience, you can express your points of view, and it spreads. I mean, both you and I get up in front of audiences, and increasingly I have opportunities to express a point of view. Similarly, well, I always have, to be honest, one of the great things about being an analyst. But the other one is writing, right? You can write your own pieces like you've done, right? And you can spread that around, and it's, like memes effectively, and then people can pick up on it as they will. And it may go around in different social media platforms, it may not, but all you can do is put stuff out there, and there are lots of ways it can get around. But getting onto Twitter and getting into a fight with a bunch of trolls is, I mean, I had that experience years ago, actually. It was sitting in Singapore 4 or 5 years ago, and it was some guy who used to take on the far right in the UK, and I said something to defend him, and then before I knew it, I was just bombarded by hostility. And I was thinking, where is this coming from? And then I thought it was off, and this is my work Twitter handle. I use this professionally, and I thought, I really don't. This is not a good look.
Yeah, right.
So I just thought, I'm not engaging, right? I'm just not doing this, because it, when professionally I'm trying to have it, be professional, basically, not someone who's going out there fighting with neo-Nazis and so on. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but that's my personal life, right? That's not my professional life. I mean, I knew people when I was growing up in Sheffield, which was a very left-wing city, who'd go out and say, "Oh, we're going to find some Nazis and kick their heads in. We're going to have a fight with them because we heard there's a skinhead demonstration somewhere, and we're going to go and we're going to sort them out," right? So that's something you do. Not that I'm saying I would do that now at my age and my physical state, but it's I'm sure I'd be flattened immediately if I did it. But it's something you do in your personal life.
But I don't think you have to. I really don't. I don't think you have to.
Sure, you can express your opinion, but if I go up and I start Now, I know we had this discussion before, right? But if I start, on my professional channels, getting into, passionate arguments with people about something that a lot of people construe as political, there might be a perception that you're, that we don't want this controversial person. We don't want to do business with this person who's constantly being politically controversial, right? Simple as that.
Yeah, but like I said, like we got Yuri and Juzzy here commenting, so thanks, guys. But I don't think you need to get involved in the fight. I really don't. Like when my husband was in surgery, I just participated in a conversation on Twitter, and I got the same pile on, just a couple of months ago, and it was just so stupid. I'm like, oh, go away. It was like, you morons. Like, and so my thing now is I know how much work I do. I know how much I read and watch and listen. I know what I do before I express an opinion. Some stranger on Twitter, I don't even know if they're a human being, and I certainly don't know how much work they've done. Right. So your opinion, if you disagree with me, I don't care if you disagree with me because I have respect for the fact that you've formed an opinion based on a lot of work. Right. But some random dude, I couldn't care less. So, Greta Thunberg was interviewed recently. You mentioned her earlier about how she deals with the trolls, and she just said, "I don't," and she laughs and has fun with it, and I think that's so healthy, and that just to have that attitude. But
that's her thing. That's her thing.
Yeah.
Her thing is to communicate, right? So. But it's not my thing is not to go out there and communicate on these topics. Yeah, I take this point. If people were allowed to be anonymous, their cowardly pylons would disappear. But it's the problem is a lot of the social media. Back to my point, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but a lot of the platforms we use are used professionally as well. I used to try and keep Facebook separate. And then I would express opinions, a lot of political opinions on Facebook. I don't know, you might remember I used to.
Yeah, I remember.
Certainly around Brexit and so on. And before that, a lot. It was just, if I read something, I just put it up there and get a discussion around it. But what I then discovered is in Singapore, all the people I met professionally wanted to friend me on Facebook. And it seemed to be something that people did. So I thought, look, I don't want these people having, judging me by my personal political interests. Right? This is for my friends. This is not the professional thing is different.
Yeah. I combined all of my voices a long time ago.
Yeah, and that's what you do, right? But I don't. So if I go out and I talk about cybersecurity, I need to be as professional and evidence-based as possible in everything I say. I can't give an impression to somebody that I'm going to go down a certain perspective that they may view as politically motivated in some way or another. I mean, it really is sensitive, some of the stuff that we do, or that I do when I'm with clients.
And so I suppose the point is we've all got to work out who we are and how we want to show up in the world based on what we do, right? But if you and there's one thing that you can do if you don't want to get involved with the arguments, be a voice of love in the world.
I tell you,
share hope, share the good stories, show all the amazing sides of humanity and nature that are going on. Because the one thing that we don't get enough of in the media, we certainly don't get enough of in the media, is the good stuff. And so we think it's all bad stuff, and it's not. So if you don't want
stick to the so-called mainstream media, because you know who pays for it, you know who's behind it, you know what its constitution is, what it's all about. I mean, I'm just getting offline as much as I can now. And I'm trying, it's a nightmare getting my kids offline. So my point is that it's good point. There are a lot of fat phobic people, but I am doing everything. I think I was talking to you earlier to start with. I think the internet is toxic now. It's net negative now. So I'm just doing what I have to do professionally. And I'm trying to keep my personal and family life and my personal points of view off it. Now, I'm not keeping quiet. I'm not staying out of the argument. I'm having the argument. What I do is if somebody says something that is toxic, in my view, I will challenge them. So if I meet someone, I was in England recently and I got in touch with them. I was pleased to see that a lot of my friends and myself had the same worldview and we hadn't seen each other since we were 19 or 20 years old, and we'd evolved in a very similar way in our perspectives of the world and what was going on. It was nice. I didn't feel isolated or alone at all. But I did also meet some people who'd gone down the rabbit hole. and I can characterize them in certain ways, and I find it awful saying that, but often people who'd never left the town they were brought up in, never went to uni or anything, and they were much more susceptible to latching onto these conspiracy oriented narratives that we're all familiar with. But what I was doing was I was having a go at at these individuals. Look, to respond to this point, the internet isn't toxic or small, but that's right. But this amplification, I wouldn't say it's people. I'd say a lot of it is nation state directed, is drowning out the internet with toxicity. The trolls that are coming from nation states that we mentioned earlier on, some of them are bots, some of them are individuals who are paid to push narratives, are making it such a toxic space. And it's not just in this area. We talked about kids. I find it just horrifying how my kids aren't able to keep away from it, no matter what controls we put in place, because they need to use the internet for school, right? So we'll do everything we can to keep them off TikTok and their devices, but they'll use the web browser to get on it. So it's damaging. I can see how damaging it is to kids as they're growing up. It's negative. It's damaging. It's dangerous. It's causing climate denialism to become a mainstream perspective. The things we're talking about. If there was no internet, it would never be a mainstream perspective. We'd have a better chance of all this stuff you're talking about being controlled. We'd have never had Donald Trump. We'd never have Brexit.
Yeah.
If we had no internet, right? So the amount of damage it's caused is immense. And this is since about 2015, 2016. Prior to that, I think you could say, let's go 2014 or thereabouts. Prior to that, it was, yes, I think you could say that it was generally positive.
Yeah. But I want to go back to the democratization of information argument, right? So these authoritarian movements, however you want to call them, countries, whatever, it is in their interest to destroy social media because they don't want their citizens having access to it either. First thing they do in their own countries is control access on social media, and what you can do in China, you get rewards for your behavior, all that sort of stuff, right? So what are we going to allow them to win?
Well, they are leveraging social media as a platform, right? It's in their interest not to destroy social media. It's in their interest to destroy any criticism of what they do, right? So if you criticize what they do, even verbally, or even as a teacher, or as a journalist or a news reporter, you're in trouble. So I think, I would say that,
but in their own countries, right?
I would say they've weaponized social media. They've weaponized it in such a way as to undermine science, to undermine, to reinforce this move towards a climate catastrophe that you're talking about, to put in dangerous governments and dangerous political movements in the Western world, and domestically they use it as a tool to control their own populations. Yes. So I think it's toxic. Yeah. Again, I think sooner or later, I think you've got to take that stance that the internet has now eaten itself. For want of a better term, it's now net negative, and social media probably only had a few years where you could say, oh, it's great. You can share your family photos with the rest of your family, and you can get into a conversation with all your mates and stay in touch with them. I guess it still has that benefit, but I think it's gone beyond that, and it's a toxic cesspit that's creating nothing but danger and damage for the world.
Yeah, but I do want I do want to challenge everyone to really think about what we lose and who gains from that. But the other thing that I've just gone blank. I'll come back to it. But the question is, why do we allow ourselves to continue to be manipulated? I know, Andy, you're not a psychologist, right? So we won't go there. But with all of the truth of the climate emergency physically around us, we went through extreme temperatures. I know you're sitting in winter over there, so you might not have seen any of that. Is the temperatures
wild rain? We've had wild rain, but unusually high rainfall.
Right. Okay. We're seeing ocean temperatures, Antarctic ice. It has never been so low at this time of year. Lots of stuff is being shared at the moment, right? And and yet we seem to have so many people in the world who are willing to believe what's being said here rather than what's actually before their eyes. But I think the thing that I always really struggle with is anyone actually benefiting from sowing this disinformation? Because, we're all living on the same planet. We're all breathing the same air. Whether you're wealthy or poor, we're all facing the same risks. If you're wealthy, you might be able to live a little longer than someone who's poor, but not that much longer. So, obviously information silos play a massive role here too. But yeah, what do you think, Andy?
Okay, two things to pick you up on the 2 points. The power, okay. So the manipulation piece, okay, was the first bit, and then so let me start with the last bit. So you're saying what's the motive behind it? I think it's power and control, right? It's a motive for a lot of things, but it's power and control. It's authoritarians. Basically, they found a way to get power and control that they wouldn't have otherwise have found, and they found that through the internet and social media. This is why I have such an objection to the internet and social media today. I just think it's so damaging. People being manipulated, you mentioned. I think it's difficult to say that these people have been manipulated. It's that these people are the information source they have. They're not reading books. They're going through social media platforms with algorithms targeting them that have been polluted by bots and narratives coming from people like some of the folks we named before, like what I see coming to me, like Jordan Peterson stuff. They've gone, okay, this is a white middle-aged guy who's probably angry. Let's send him some fodder to make him angrier, right? From Jordan Peterson, some simple slogans that make sense, if you don't think about it or read books much. But it's wrong to say manipulated. This is what people get. Somebody could sit back, philosophers say, well, everybody's manipulated to some extent, and everybody is to some extent. But what is happening is that people, pre-internet and pre-social media, you get your information from kind of random, diverse sources: your family, your friends, your community, your education, books, right, that you read, and so on. And it's very difficult for anyone to control that. It's quite random, right? Whereas today, everybody's just getting their information from the internet and social media, and it's quite easy to control what information people are getting doing that. And that is what is scary. So someone who's not bothering to go beyond those online sources, and they go, I'll just do more research online, rather than picking up a book and reading it, rather than trying to understand what the truth means and what truth is by understanding different philosophical approaches to truth. I'm not saying everyone should do it, but these kind of things help you in life to make decisions that are in your own best interests.
Yeah.
But I think people are just doing what's simple to them, and they see someone online, simple message. They're not being manipulated. That's just where they're getting their information from, in the same way as maybe in the past someone might have got it from, they're still living their lives in broadly the same way, right? But their opinions and their voting behavior is being influenced by these narratives they're getting online.
Yeah. So I just remembered what I talked about, and which I think is actually would be cool to get your perspective. Right. So we've got Brigadier Sushil here again. Thanks for joining us. The social media companies, the people who basically own the internet, they're also the ones who own all the AI. So we've got a destroyed network as far as you're concerned, and now we're going to layer that on top of it. So what do you think about that?
It's disruption squared, right? It's squaring it, cubing it. It's that these AIs are going to end up with their own biases. A lot of the algorithms, a lot of the feeds that we get are based on artificial intelligence, right? So a lot of hardcore data analytics is already in there. To be honest, actually, it's already there, right? So I think we're talking about the future. It's already there. So there's so much AI already built in to these very sophisticated social media platforms. They're looking at adding additional layers of AI that, again, in my view, are even more dangerous. Again, I would, my recommendation to people would be stop getting your information online. Just pick up a book, find some sources elsewhere to get information. Do I was about to say an online course, do a face-to-face, go to college, listen to a few lectures at your local university, whatever it is, right? But just make online sources a lower proportion of the information you get. I think it's unrealistic to say don't do it at all, but just make sure that if you're getting information online, you're complementing that with other offline sources of information, just to give yourself, put yourself and your own life in a better position to make decisions that are in the interest of you and the community and the humanity at large, right? Which is really what we're talking about.
Basically, yeah, that's 100% what we're talking about. If you're being lied to, that's going to create some trouble for you and your family down the track, right?
Yeah, but you're getting that perspective, that narrative, that point of view that would have been at one point something only 1% of the population believed in, turned into something that maybe 30 or 40% of the population believe in, because the narrative is just pushed so hard and so aggressively. That wacky point of view that you'd have this crazy guy in your social group that comes up. If you remember, I used to have friends that had all these slightly crazy conspiracy theories that would come out with it, and they're always interesting to talk to. And they go, I read this book, you should read this book, right? But now this weird, wacky stuff, the conspiracy theories around 9/11, there were loads of books around that. I think I read a couple, I latched onto a few of them. But now those are mainstreaming, because those narratives have been pushed so hard in the on every social media platform, every information source on the internet. So I think we really need to start making sure that a much lower proportion of our thinking comes from that. And I think somebody popped up saying talking to humans. I think that's a good point. I mean, look, the internet's great for what we're doing now, being able to communicate and talk to each other, across whatever such a huge distance. Look, I don't want to say that there's no benefits. But if you think about, you were saying we're facing an environmental catastrophe. A lot of that has to do with the internet.
Yeah.
We're facing, all kinds of major problems. A lot of that has to do with the way the internet has been misused and abused and exploited and used as a platform for, the powerful people to push agendas that aren't in the interests of the majority.
Yeah. All right. So let's wrap it up with our tips to protect ourselves from getting caught up in propaganda, misinformation, and lies, because I actually find that even people who disagree with me, that they're not actually the sort of people that want to be lied to. They don't want to believe lies. They believe that what they're saying is true. So this isn't people actively allowing themselves to be misled, right? So, and who knows, maybe one day I'll turn around and go, wow, someone got me too, right? But, it's hard. But I work really, really, really hard to make sure that I go across it like you. I read every opinion, even the ones that make me feel sick to my stomach, because I can't have a point of view unless I understand all of the different points of view around a topic. So that's just my commitment. But
which is the way to start.
You want to start with some tips?
Look, I think, some tips is I think you really should. I mean, an important thing to do, and the internet makes it hard, because what I've discovered on the internet is a lot of the time people will make ad hominem attacks or personal attacks on people they disagree with, like just start insulting. It turns into like a childish,
it's horrible
15-year-old slanging match before you know it, right? So I think that it's important to, if you have, I mean, most people by the time they get to a certain age have built up a community of friends and acquaintances and business colleagues that have a diversity of opinions, and I think it's important to speak to them and to stay in touch with those people, and to keep them, even if you find someone's political perspectives, something you disagree with. I mean, look, in my life, I never have allowed that to stop me from being friends with people. Yeah. But I do think it's important to make sure that you listen to other people's points of view and consider them. Yeah. Totally. And whatever their points of view are, and to realize that even these people who are picking up on this, these narratives we're discussing, the climate denialism and so on, you still have to listen to them, because what they're doing is they're expressing a point of view that in the past, pre-internet and social media, maybe 1 or 2% would believe anyway. Those people would always be around, but it's just there are a lot more now, because those narratives are being pushed so much more aggressively. So instead of it being a small minority, it's a large minority that have those points of view, and a large minority that's aggressively pushing for power. So
I want to add one. If everyone around you agrees with you, that's a sign that you're in a silo, an information silo, and may not be getting the full story. It doesn't mean it's incorrect, but if everyone agrees with you, I'd just say stretch outside of that and face up to some other people's point of views, even if it makes you uncomfortable. But try not to ever personally attack anyone who disagrees with you. I don't play that game at all. Even though I've had all sorts of horrible things said to me, I just ignore it because they don't know who I am. So why would they even say it? But don't join that game. And it's horrible to witness it, but unfortunately, there's a lot of very angry people.
Yeah, don't take this stuff personally, right? So do not take this stuff personally. Whatever angle you're at, and whatever you do, don't go around making ad hominem personal attacks on people you disagree with. And if they, to be honest, if they my response is if someone does it to me, I just ignore them. I walk away. Yeah, I don't engage in it, and that's what I was taught to do a long time ago, right? When I was a kid, what my mother would tell me to do, and I've always done that, right? And I find it bizarre that as a grown up and much older person, all of a sudden this ad hominem slagging off seems to be becoming much more mainstream.
I like that, insecure child. The other one is there's a famous quote that in the good times the weak men rule, and in the hard times the strong men rise. And obviously strong men and women is the right one. But I just want to really encourage everyone with the rise of the extreme right and extreme left, right? Any extreme politics, be very wary, especially any that claim that they can solve societal issues like bring jobs back, manage inflation. When the climate is the underlying issue that's causing the societal problems, anyone who stands up and says they can fix it, that's something that to be really, really aware of, because they can't guarantee they can fix that because they can't control nature. So
just a quick one on that. Quick one. The extreme left is not on the ascendancy at the moment. You could argue it was after World War II and up until maybe the 90s.
During COVID, they had to go.
Yeah, but they were never near the levers of power, right? So, but the extreme right is on the ascendancy. So what I find interesting is that as the World War II generation die off, the ideology they were fighting against has suddenly started to gain traction again. And it's something they always warned against. They'd say this stuff happened in Germany and it could happen anywhere. Germany, there's nothing unique. I mean, sure, there are economic issues in the 1930s and so on, but unique about German people that made them any different from people anywhere else. Exactly. So there's that threat of far-right politics has always been there, but the people that were a bulwark against it and knew about it and talked about it, they've all pretty much died off now.
Yeah. I spent my life wondering,
dealing with it.
Yeah, exactly. I spent my life wondering how the Holocaust happened. And these last few years, I'm like, that's how it happened.
Yeah, exactly.
We're living that time. And it's how do we let it happen, The other thing I always really encourage people is really check your emotions. So the social media algorithms are all about outrage, right? So immediate and strong negative emotional responses is a good sign just to stop, have a think about it, dig into the story, go across multiple platforms, go and look at sites like NASA, nature.com, some of the scientific places where they're publishing really amazing information. But you can get to the truth, but you've got to do the work. And I don't think a lot of people want to do the work. I'll just give you a claim. It's not climate related. There's this evangelical Christian at the moment in the US who's telling Christians to strap bombs to their chests. Have you seen that? Just been breaking this week. Yeah, no, it's pretty bad. But another one is apparently the Democrats are allowing babies to be aborted weeks after they are born. I'm like, that's not true.
A misinformation narrative, but it gets traction, and it's designed to be divisive and polarizing.
So that's what about you? What some other tips?
On what people should do to address all of this stuff. Interestingly, I know it sounds old-fashioned, but I think we need to do this a little bit. But go to a library, right? There's plenty of books. I mean, libraries still exist. I notice where I am, there's plenty of them. I was in one recently for some other local council service, but I thought, I should spend a bit more time in a library, right? We did everything we could to encourage our kids to go to libraries, but they're infected now with TikTok and Snapchat and you name the toxic medium. But pick up a book. When you're in the airport, I know they have a limited. I like that. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, there's plenty of material you can. I know it's limited what they sell on airports and it's self-selecting in a way, but there's still some reasonably good material you can pick up when you're on a plane rather than gulping at a film.
Yeah. We talked about it earlier. Work out how the people that you're listening to are being paid, even if you love them. Work out how they're being paid. It's really important. I think it's such a critical part of the story. There's a lot of scientists who've been paid by the fossil fuel industry as the experts, and they are putting doubt, but they're being paid. We've got to start holding the social media companies accountable, like what you were talking about. There's a lot more being discussed around the impact and the harm that's being done to children. We're not going to get kids off social media. That's not realistic. So as parents, we've got to work hard, right? But traditional media as well, and we've got to start demanding that they put the experts on rather than the think tanks.
I think the state of Utah in the United States has banned under 18s from getting access to social media platforms. And it's basically saying, we will prosecute you, social media company, if we find 14, 15-year-olds on your platforms in the state of Utah. And that means the social media companies have to validate and make sure that every time, and they have to put some mechanism in place, every time an under 18 tries to get on, that it's validated. So if they can do that in Utah, they can do it everywhere else.
Yeah, well, we'll see, because, the idea that old people think they can control young people with technology. Yeah, but this is a really good point from Sushil, because we don't spend time with knowledge anymore. It's all quick. You got to get your message across in 2 seconds, and our need for knowledge speed is actually, I think, causing part of the harm. So I think that's
we don't need it. We're just fed with too much junk. But don't you think libraries are decaying? Look, to that question, yes. I mean, they're not as popular as they once were. But I think one of the reasons that libraries are decaying is because people aren't going to them as much. But people should. I mean, again, I've noticed every suburb where I live now has libraries, and they do have like a whole range of newspapers and magazines that you can read. Ones that, The Economist, I can go and get the Financial Times and the Economist, sit there and read it if I wanted to. Yeah. I'm not really into the habit of doing it. I can go to, giving you a hint as to some of the stuff I read, but I can also get the Guardian or the West WA Today, the Western Australian, whatever. I could pick it up, and a huge range of books. There'll be plenty of stuff that I could learn something from in that local suburb library. Not to mention the universities, right? There's a whole bunch of universities in most big cities that have got massive libraries.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in reading more about COVID, you can find stuff in there. If you're interested more in climate change, you can find proper research material in there.
Yeah. Spending time with information that matters is one of my mantras. It's one of those little simple things that I hope breaks through one day. But the final one I've got, obviously there's a lot of wealthy special interest group that are funding the dissemination of disinformation, and we can see what's going on around us. But speak up with your family, your friends, and your community. If someone shares a mistruth, like just recently I was with a group of people, and a couple of the people sort of said something, and I was like, no, that's not the information's not backing up that claim. It was just gentle, no aggression. Everyone was fine. We just moved on. But have the courage to speak up, especially if you're spending the time understanding it. When it comes to anything to do with the climate, we've really got to normalize the conversation. A lot of people still don't want to talk about it. It's boring, it's depressing, but we've got to act. And we're seeing this year and the predictions of what's coming this year and next year with El Nino kicking in, some of the extremes, like we really don't know what's coming our way. So I'm always saying to people, you've got to get prepared. We're getting prepared for extreme heat because we've already gone through it. And that's, there's a lot of things that you can do to get ready for this. And adaptation is where we're at now. So speak about what you're doing. Don't keep it to yourself because other people need to know. Need help. Yeah. Any final thoughts?
I think to your point, Andrea, is look, I think you have a lot more influence as if people around you and somebody says something that is is bang out of order or just completely wrong, as you say, politely challenge them. Don't make a personal attack. Just challenge they don't say you idiot or whatever. Just challenge their perspective on it. And as you said, say, look, what you've just said isn't really backed up by any evidence, is it? Or do you have some evidence to substantiate or support what you're saying? I'm interested to know. Yeah. Something and challenge them. I mean, usually they don't.
Yeah. Most of the people I know how much I read, so they go like, when I said the evidence doesn't back it up, they're like, oh, okay. All right.
Well, then, like, you're scared of getting into an argument with you.
No, because I'm not. I actually don't argue. Like you and I can have an argument, but it's always fun. I don't argue very much. If people are really strong on an opinion and they're not there to have a conversation, it's like, it's okay. We don't need to talk. I had something recently. Someone said, "Well, you're very firm in your opinion." I just met this person, and I'm like, "Yeah, I do a lot of work to understand this." So, I'm happy to talk to you about it if you want to talk about it, but I don't agree with you, and that's okay. I want to hear what you've got to say because maybe something they say will change something that I've thought, and I'm happy. Because I'd love to be wrong, I do. But if you don't love to be wrong, it's not as much fun, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you have to be open to being wrong and learning something that will change your perspective, your point of view as well. That's another important lesson. Yeah. It's not a personal slight if you're wrong and somebody presents you with information that challenges your perspective. That can only be a good thing.
Yeah. I'm very happy for someone to show me something. All right, Andy, thank you so much for joining us. It's a big, wide conversation, this one, but we've got to spend time. We've got to work harder. We've built a fast culture. Everything's fast. Fast fashion, fast food, fast furniture. Everything's fast, right? And our knowledge consumption is fast too. And I think we've got to slow down in every way anyway, but we've got to slow down and really understand these big issues as much as we can, and that's a change in how we behave with knowledge. And there are vested interest groups out there telling us things that are not good for us, and
for sure
we need to know who those vested groups are and
we need transparency. I mean, just quickly, that's another argument. When people go on about the mainstream media and denigrate it, I go, well, at least with the mainstream media, you know who owns it, you know where it's coming from. They know that they're subject to defamation suits and libel, so to some extent what they say is managed. I mean, I know there's a few situations when they go a bit off, but there is some management around it. Whereas the stuff you get online, you have no idea who's behind it, who's funding it, who's source, what agenda they're pushing.
Yeah, transparency, right?
Yeah, transparency. Yeah,
that's everything. It's everything.
Yeah, so even Fox News, right? At least. I don't like a lot of what's said. I don't agree with a lot of what's said. At least I know who's behind it and what the agenda is when I choose to watch it.
Yeah, and it's important to watch it so you understand.
Yeah, so as you know what the perspectives are, of course, yes.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Andy. And I'm going to have a break from Climate Courage for a little while. Probably come back sometime in August. If you want to come and join me and talk about any of the topics that you want to talk about when it comes to climate, I'm always happy for people to reach out. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed today's chat. Andy, thanks always for being up for an open conversation on wherever it goes.
Well, great to be here as always.
Yeah, and we'll see you all soon. All right. So I'm going to end the broadcast.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
All right. Bye.